he was a genius, and part of it was his songwriting, his lyrics. He's gotten such a reputation from the Stones and the guitar players and all that, and his look, but actually his lyrics were probably his greatest gift as a songwriter.
Johnny Be Good was one of the songs sent into space by the Voyager. Send More, Chuck Berry. Saturday Night Live and all that. To demonstrate humanity's greatest cultural achievements. What is so great about that song? What is it about Johnny Be Good?
Well, I think Johnny Be Good came at a time where it just, from music, sonically and lyrically, presented in a strange way a celebration and unity of life for all. That, I don't know, it was kind of a melding pot. You had all these great artists and, you know, African-American artists, and there was a lot of prejudice, and, you know, begrudgingly would let them play here and there. On the radio was struggling with not playing or playing music. And Chuck came along with this, almost this, you know, an innocence and a joy that wasn't as threatening as, you know, down and out blues or R&B. And when you add the sophistication of poetry, even though it's Johnny Be Good, it just seemed like a very, you know, radical and welcoming all at once, that song, you know, with the guitar licks, the piano, but there was a lilt of some kind of hope amidst all of it, to me anyway. It was kind of it wasn't pop, it was just Chuck Berry, but it was accessible. It was emotionally accessible to a wide swath of people without, you know, being corny or soppy. It had all the balls and guts, but there was a kind of a hope and welcoming mat in that song that I think appealed to everyone, that made it universal. Kind of Mankind at their best, or encouraging everyone to, hey, you know, don't worry about your sons or daughters. Here's what they're listening to, and they're dancing and they're smiling, right? Check it out. There was an unthreatening air about a great creation like that I thought one of the reasons that song has been so powerful through the decades. Just to have him on stage, you know, just singing, you know, and then just once in a while, with this big, you know, this finger could cover 3 strings, right? I don't know how long they were, but and that's the thing. You just adapt to what you got. And to see that kind of power and visceral, you know, conveying of emotion, whether it's Chuck, Little Richard, Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters, back to, you know, there were a lot of greats before them, Robert Johnson. I mean, imagine being some guy like you and me that was predisposed to enjoying that music, walking in a bar and Robert Johnson's playing in the corner, and you're like, what the fuck? And you go up and you know, like, am I hearing that? And then, you know, and that's the interesting thing, because there's so many, like, I'll be in a music store and I'll hear some 14-year-old playing guitar 5 times as fast as I'll ever play it. But there's something else in there. And I'll walk up and go, yeah, there's something in there that's cool, man. You're gonna find it, you're getting there. But I mean, then you fast forward to walking into like a bar, the first time, you know, Keith saw Chuck Berry live, the first time I saw Jimi Hendrix live. I mean, I was just like, transported, you know. It was like a sacred weapon that just kind of said, this is the key. This is the key to surviving life in this crazy, prejudiced, beautiful, glorious world with everything, you know, good and evil standing in the same line for a cup of coffee. And sometimes you don't recognize it, you know. And sometimes saints and people that are healers can come in the, you know, strangest forms, like Chuck Berry, who, you know, won't help the band out and gives the promoter shit and wants to get paid before he walks out. But when he walks out, some healing's going down. And, you know, that's when, that's to me is the greatest thing about music is, hey, here's a gift. It's a lot more powerful than you. It's a lot more worldly and forgiving than you. Go share it.
That very thing about, if it hadn't been for the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, you wouldn't have necessarily gone the way you did. Do you think if we hadn't had Chuck Berry, there would be a Stones or the Beatles?
You know what? I've often looked at that a lot because I discovered Chuck through Keith. And even though intellectually and musically, I certainly see the influence. I totally get it. It's almost like everything I talk about my heroes is how Keith talks about his, which were a little bit of a generation before. And, you know, I don't think, no, there would have been a Keith Richards or a Stones without Chuck Berry. I think we all would have played music. Like I said, maybe I would have been playing top 40 and on an Accordivox in a Ramada Inn bar. Keith might have taken it a bit further than that and found his own way, you know. But without those guys to blaze the trail, it just laid out a roadmap and a magical key to the kingdom, like every day, really, through the music and watching them create it, waiting for the next record. And, you know, Keith's spoken very eloquently about his love for Chuck and the inspiration it was. And interesting story because, you know, my visceral attachment was to the Stones, the Beatles, like Harrison, Keith Richards, Eric Clapton, Jimi Hendrix, Jeff Beck, Roy Buchanan. So Keith is this mythical musical figure to me. I mean, I met him, he's very friendly. I wrote a song, Keith Don't Go, about him, and, you know, just say, hey, stick around, we need you, kind of thing. Years ago on the Tonight's a Night tour, of all things, I was in England with Neil Young. I wrote that song. But he's always been friendly and very encouraging. And I remember, though, that when you get imprinted for the first time in rock and roll, we're talking about, I went to see the Expensive Winos. Steve Jordan's an old buddy, brought me back in the dressing room, said hi to Keith. You know, Keith knows I'm a big fan. I'm not a friend, just a great admirer. He's always friendly. And so me and Steve Jordan were off in the back of the room talking, and the guy wheels in a little amp. Keith plugs in a guitar, puts it on a stand for Keith to practice, leaves, and I'm sitting there talking to Steve Jordan, and, you know, Keith starts doing the Chuck Berry lick. And I'm paying attention to Steve, but I'm going, I know that, but why is it different? What's different? And then he started playing all the different versions of Chuck Berry. But you know what? I swear to God, John, it just felt like there was a reverence that Keith Richards was imprinted with when he first heard those guitar licks and first heard Chuck Berry. And what Chuck did to him, Chuck, in my mind, instilled a reverence and a soulful vision of what Chuck was playing that meant more to Keith than Chuck. And it was almost like I finally thought, what is going on with that riff I've heard a billion times and played? Say, there's a deeper connection and attachment to that riff than even Chuck had creating it. That was my take. It's like that music that Chuck Berry played, when it dumped itself on Keith, imprinted him in a way that was so deep, it almost felt like deeper than Chuck discovering it, kind of thing. I don't know, it was just a weird thing I felt when Keith did that. A million people could have gone and played the exact same notes he was playing. I could have picked up guitar and played the same notes. If Chuck Berry had walked in the room and played the same notes, at that point in time, I don't think it would have felt as good as it did to me when Keith was doing it.
And do you think that Chuck Berry had influenced Keith to such an extent that set up the Rolling Stones sound and what Rolling Stones stood for, which was also a little bit of what Chuck was about, was like, hey, attitude. Do you think the music created that?
Yeah, I think the music, look, you always get inspired by your heroes, but then if you take that correct attitude of resistance and, you know, being a maverick and kind of blazing your own trail, taking everything you can from your heroes, part of blazing your own trail is like honoring everything, but finding how to create a picture of your own. And that, to me, is what the Stones did. Kind of the spacing and Chuck's music and all that music in that time. There was a rawness to it. There was a roughness. There were no auto-tuners. There were no, like, even people didn't plug in and tune. You know, I remember the old days, you had to find a quiet room and you had to tune to each other. It's a pain in the ass, man. You know, like, okay, these two are in tune, but you're not in tune. But I don't want to change because I'm in tune with him. I mean, it was hilarious. But there's this little, all these edges are in there, and they learned them from Chuck Berry and all that music. But I thought the Stones very early on were very brave and what you wanted to be, and kind of the, you know, irreverence toward, you know, form, structure, or just like exploring, creating. Like creating's good, period, if you feel it. And with guys like Muddy Waters and Chuck Berry as guides, I think it kind of gave the Stones permission very early on to just run with it, and look what's happened.
In a previous interview you asked, or rather you said, Chuck Berry is to Keith Richards what Keith Richards is to me.
Yeah, you know, when I was talking earlier about having never heard the Chuck Berry lick played as like deeply as when I heard Keith Richards play it, and of course I'm sure Chuck could, you're doing a film on him, I'm sure he would tell you, or there's footage of him talking about his heroes and where he got his thing, and I could go back and listen to him, and you know, even though no one might be doing and all the other stuff he did, I'm sure you could probably feel a seed of the inspiration that came from his heroes into what he did and made it his own. When I heard Keith, it sounded to me like, of course, the combination of Chuck Berry and the blues with his love of country, and then of course the famous 5-string open tuning where you cut off the 6th string, traditionally a country thing. But with that sensibility of the guitar from Chuck and the R&B and the, you know, the old blues greats that the Stones idolized, you know, Chuck, not only Chuck, but Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf. I got to see Muddy a couple of times, and I could see the correlation. And then you add in the open tuning country thing and just the country sensibility. I think those two things kind of just dumped on Keith, and I watched him taking that and making it his own over and over as a songwriter. That's why people say, oh, well, you know, Keith's a good rhythm player. It's like, that's misleading. He's you know, one of the great guitar players because he's writing themes and songs as he plays. It's not just here's a solo, somebody can play it faster. It's like, no, there's a theme that now is a core of a song, and that's how he hears things. And I watched that kind of being developed, and you know, like, what's he doing there? What's he doing there? Kind of probably what we all did, you know, like putting on the record, learning the Chuck Berry lick. I put on the record and learned the Keith Richards lick. And then I'm like, how come I can't get those chords to sound so full? I mean, years went by. I was like an idiot. I never thought, oh, open tuning. Maybe you're not tuning your guitar right. But that's the journey. And, you know, that's why I say Keith was that for me, because it like opened up a whole new world of sound past Jimmy killing us with his lead guitar or 2- and 3-note little wing stuff, and Jeff Beck doing kind of the same thing. With Keith, it was a whole like thematic and cinematic almost approach to guitar playing as counter themes, like classical themes, 2 or 3 guitar parts. They might be rough and through an electric amp, but you look at Brown Sugar or Jumpin' Jack Flash, you look at the 2 or 3 parts, and they could be an orchestra doing beautiful counterpoint. And I learned from Keith to explore those different ideas, and with a classical accordion background, I had a wealth of ideas that now I was trying to interpret through these guttural raw sounds that they turned me on to.